What is going on YouTube? This is Acid Roots. So I'm going to review a 2014 mixtape by Rich Gang. Basically, this project is called Rich Gang The Tour Part 1, and it came out in the fall of 2014. So the thing about this particular product is this is the fact that this kind of came... The thing about this particular product is it came out after the Rich Gang album from the summer of 2013. There were actually a series of Rich Gang projects. There was also a mixtape that was a Rich Gang project that came out in early 2013. So it's a pretty good pitch that Bird Gang, that basically Birdman and his group basically supported this particular style for a good while. It's a pretty good pitch to get that in particular, I'd have to say. Now this is a decent mixtape here, but this is a relatively good mixtape, but it just came out at like a swash timing for mixtapes as far as that particular kind of fair happened. There weren't as many predominant mixtapes in like the late fall of 2014 and pitches like that as far as these sorts of things gonna happen. You know, Meek Mill, probably one of the bigger mixtapes, and back in those days was Meek Mill's Dream Chasers 3, and there weren't a ton of huge mixtapes that really came out in 2014. Like Rick Ross didn't really drop any mixtapes in 2014. No Kendrick mixtapes, no folks like that. Young Thug was kind of doing some mixtapes, but Gucci Mane was in prison, folks like that. There just were a bunch of things in particular that kind of slided some of that mixtape type fare. Migos was still doing mixtapes, so it was just kind of here and there. The sounds were kind of transgressing to like the 2010s trap that's been dominant for about the past 10 or so years as far as that pitch that's kind of happened. The Future Migos, Young Thug, NBA Youngboy type sound, some of those type pitches in particular, some of those type folks. Also Lil Baby, Dub Baby, some of those type folks, just a bunch of folks like that. Gunna, some of those type folks that I had to say. So it's a good concept. This is kind of like a prenatal project. It's kind of like a prenatal project here, I'd have to say in particular, but it's just kind of the fact. I mean, it has some good bops on here, I'd have to say in certain senses, but this kind of concept. This is kind of a bewildered project, I'd have to say. It's just a very brooding and kind of murky type project that doesn't have an overly predominant type sound. There's no real beat or production on here that really stands out. I feel like this London on the track cat, I kind of remember him somewhat, but he's one of the bigger producers on here, but there's nothing like a definitive. There were 5 singles, promotional singles that were released from this project, but it's just kind of the fact that a lot of this doesn't necessarily feel like winded, but it's this kind of concept. This feels very just like tamer in terms of the execution as to how this particular kind of happens. So it doesn't really have like a charting single. It has some decent bops on here just in particular, but it's not quite as standout as some of the ones that this kind of particularly came out. Like I do feel like Future's Monster was a little bit better around this particular time that came out around that sort of field. But you know, for a Young Thug mixtape, Young Thug was pretty predominant throughout 2014. He had some hit songs and pitches like that, I had to say. Like I remember he did a song with Justin Bieber or something like that called Hookah, some of those type moments, I had to say. So some good concepts. Rich Homie Quan is on here as well, so it's a good enough pitch. But Birdman is really not as full blown on this project. I originally thought when I was reviewing this that Birdman was going to be on here more. He's just more of like a host to this particular project. I'd have to say not as full blown on it, not as on it full blown, I'd have to say, but it's just a good enough concept to get some of these on here. It's just kind of, I mean, there's a lot of songs on this particular project. That's for one thing. There's 20 songs on here, and out of those 20, I wound up recommending to you 8. So it's this kind of concept. It's a little beneath, like, I mean, it's not, I don't want to say it's average. It has some good gems on here to be able to warrant some of this. There's definitely some good pull-up type songs and some relative decent trap bops on here, but it's this kind of concept that the sounds were kind of shape-shifting around this time. It was less ratchet and drill and some of those type sounds and kind of amalgamating into like the Instagram heavy kind of just relative like 2010s trap centric stuff that Future would go on to mesh further with projects like Monster and Dirty Sprite 2 and Drake with What a Time to Be Alive and Migos with Culture and some of those type moments and the Gunna projects and some of those type folks. Just kind of a good concept. But Young Thug was a part of that movement as well. He was definitely blowing up in 2014. That was one of his bigger years, I'd have to say. But we'll go ahead and talk about the singles on here. So there were 5 of them. And really, Wikipedia says that there were a few more songs that were kind of released as promotional singles, but it didn't seem like music videos came out for them. But we'll go ahead and talk about some of these. So basically, the first single on here was Tell 'Em Lies. I'd have to say it's a pretty good concept to get this one in particular. This is a pretty good single, I'd have to say. I do appreciate the concept of this one. This is like a pop trap kind of residential bounce of a song, I'd have to say in particular. It's like a getting gussied up and kind of getting ready for like a Liddy night type song, I'd have to say in particular. So it's a pretty good concept. This one's just more centric to like radio and pitches like that. I saw on Wikipedia that one of these singles on here, which I think was Milk Marie or one of these type ones, was released to radio in terms of, it was released as a music video to 106 in Park, which is a pretty good concept for like a mixtape, I'd have to say, to have some mixtape singles get airplay on like television. Good concept for that. But Tell 'Em Lies is probably one of the most commercial ones on here. It's an interesting pitch to kind of get this, just because it's kind of an awkward time. Tell 'Em Lies is like a relatively awkward type song just within the amalgamation, how the format of it particularly kind of happened. It's just interesting because this is kind of before like trap was like super predominant. I still feel like there was some leftover ratchet music and DJ Mustard type sound and some of those type things in like the first half or the first 7, 8, 9 months of 2014. 2014 as far as that kind of went. So it's just kind of, it was like a shape shifting kind of year, but this is a good concept to kind of have like a commercial type bop to kind of get for some of this. Young Thug does pretty well in this song, and Rich Homie Quan does, so it's a good concert for that. I'm a Ride is the second single. This one's more traditional trap. I'd have to say this is a good concept for this. Definitely a pretty bass thumping type one. This is like a bass thumping kind of early bird 2010s trap hit. I'd have to say a good concept for that. It's like a great pull up type music and cruise around type music. I'd have to say in particular. So it's dope enough, just real thumpish type one to kind of get for like some good, this relatively routine type activity. There's some songs. There's definitely some songs on this particular mixtape that are just for cruise around type moments, less of like cruise out kind of travel and pitches like that, and more just like residential cruise around, just momentary, just like even just going to KFC or going to like a local nightclub pitches like that, local dance club, picking up some drink at like a liquor store, some of those type pitches, hitting up a Chica's house, some of that type fare as far as that particular kind of happens. Just some real good cruise around type music, just simple type stuff to kind of get for like residential type fare. I do like the concept of some of these. I feel like at least I'm a Ride and Pull Up obviously are some good ones for that. I'd probably say Throw Your Hood Up is like a relatively good one for that. Beat It's a pretty good one for that. And I'd probably say there's at least another one on here like 730 is like another good one for that. So it's a good concepts I'd have to say. But basically that's about all the singles I recommend on here. Talk about some of these other ones. Like I didn't really appreciate the freestyle production on the song Freestyle. It's just not very was just not a very attentive type one. It was kind of like a dusky type one that just kind of felt more evening based. It's kind of like some Malays trap, but it just didn't really pull off the vibes quite as well as it needed to. It was just not quite as compelling of one to really freestyle to or pitches like that. Plus, it kind of didn't have like the best kind of song title for like a song, I'd have to say in particular. Just some pitches like that just was not that compelling of one. Soldier was kind of one that was like an R&B trap type tune. This has Jacquees on here, who was an up and coming R&B artist around that particular time. He was affiliated with Birdman and stuff, but this one just didn't have the interesting production type fare either. I kind of felt like it was trying to be like a trap type tune just with like R&B in mind. It was kind of like a shape shifting type one that was trying to shift the sounds as far as that particular kind of went, but it just was not that compelling. Rich Homie Quan's on here as well, but it just didn't really stack up to really something that I just question how many times I'd listened to it in like the standard fare. Just the arrangements of some of this, it probably should have had like a more boppus or just kind of overall more electric type production on here that could have been more compelling towards that. The melodies just didn't soothe with like the amalgamation of that particular song. This would have to say. And then Milk Marie was just kind of a poor type one. This was almost like a pop trap type one, just a little bit more for the ladies in mind, I'd have to say in particular. But just the amalgamation behind that one in particular was just not quite as shining, I'd have to say. It was just kind of one that was trying to be somewhat commercial, but this didn't pull out the vibes nearly as well enough as it probably needed to. I'd have to say this didn't really, was just not quite as affable type one, I'd have to say in particular. And that's the thing about most of this particular product is it has such a lazy and kind of limp type execution of the way it pulls off a lot of songs. There's not really like any dynamite, like this is the number one, this is the number two, there's not really any like dynamite, this is the number one, this is the number two, this is the number three, this is the top five song, something like that in particular. I'd say it's just kind of the concept that when you look after some of these, it's just a very lazy pitch, and it just feels like a real kind of here and there kind of lackadaisical type execution as far as a lot of this kind of happens. I mean, some of these songs are good. There's definitely some cruise around type songs, but even that particular fashion, I feel like later songs that Young Thug would do, especially on like Barter Six and some of those type moments, were just more, they just had a little bit more like, this is a very kind of forlorn and just beleaguered type album, I'd have to say, or mixtape. It's just kind of the concept that I feel like it just feels like preoccupied in like a certain sense just within like the concept. Not to say like it's like poor in like the quality, but it's just kind of the concept that the feistiness and this the overall ferocious bite, it just doesn't feel as hungry as it probably needs to. There's definitely some good songs on here. It's just kind of the concept that these, in terms of like songs, I would probably say that would be like a 10 out of 10, 9 out of 10 type song. Most of these don't have that particular bite or quality. I mean, I feel like the singles are at least good. There's 5 of them. They at least tried to promote it, but it doesn't have the ferocity of like these singles don't have the ferocity of like a song like Stay Schemin' by Rick Ross or House Party by Meek Mill, some of those type ones that were mixtape singles back in the day, or Best I Ever Had by Drake, some of those type ones. It just lacks like an anchored type hit that could really lay down the project. But some of these did at least get on 106 in Park, so it's a good concept for that. But yeah, so out of 20 songs in this particular mixtape, I'd have to say I wound up recommending 8. So I'll go ahead and recommend those 8 on here. So they'd be Tell 'Em Lies, I'm a Ride, Beat It, I Got, Throw Your Hood Up, Pull Up, I Know It, and 730 or 730. So basically, one of the best songs on this particular product that really is pretty close to having some of that ferocity that I feel like is 10 out of 10 appeal, I'd have to say is Throw Your Hood Up. This basically has Nipsey. Throw Your Hood Up has a pretty good cameo from Nipsey Hussle on here, I'd have to say in particular. It's like a late creeping kind of gem, I'd have to say. Pretty nice one for that. It's like a quality kind of night snarl that this song has in particular, and it's definitely good for some after hours traverse, I'd say. So it's a pretty dope concept. This is definitely one for like residential type fare once again. Most of this is just kind of around the neighborhood type fare as far as that particular kind of goes. But this Throw Your Hood Up's just a little bit more of like a jazzy type one for a little bit more late creeping pitches like that, just for some standard activity, just a little bit with more in motion kind of in mind. I'd say it's a good concept, kind of get some of these, it's some good concepts, but still, I could see this being like a snackage type gem as well, just getting some late Taco Bell, some pitches like that, some of those type fares, just picking up some swishers, some good stuff for that. It's a good one. Pull up's a pretty nice one. Also, this one goes great with I'm a Ride. I'd have to say this is another good vehicle centric type song. I'd have to say obviously this is like a glaring kind of evening trap cruise gem. I'd have to say in particular, it's like a good pairing with I'm a Ride. Like I was saying, this is a pretty trendy mixtape pop. I'd have to say. So this album definitely has some good cruise around type ones. Definitely for some car centric type stuff just to have them. And considering that this product is free, is a pretty good bonus concept on top of that. Just to be able to get some of these, just to be able to have like some good around the neighborhood. And the fact that this came out, this is kind of an overlooked mixtape. I look after it, this probably had some good appeal back in the fall of 2014, maybe early 2015. But I look after this is some good stuff here to kind of revisit, just because the concept that Rich Gang is not commonly talked about with Young Thug being in prison. This is kind of, I mean, Young Thug has dropped pretty much over like 20 mixtapes, something like that. He has a bunch of projects, so it's just some good concepts. Same thing with Rich Homie Quan, it has to say. So it's just some good concepts to get some of these and just have some good tunes just for car centric type stuff and just cruise around the neighborhood, picking up some KFC, some stuff like that. Just getting like some stuff, picking up some snackage, some of that type of stuff. I'd say some good stuff. 730 is a pretty nice one. It's like a glossy kind of loud pack nightclub gem. I'd have to say in particular. This song's a little bit more in your face of like some outing noise. I'd have to say some good concepts for that one. The few songs that just feels very glitzy and just kind of more jazzy just within that particular kind of sense that I'd say. And it's like a good cruise around tune as well, I'd have to say. So it's just some good concepts just for some car centric type stuff. This also works. I mean, this one's pretty relatively, I mean, this one has the appeal behind it, but I still feel like this is not like a 10 out of 10 production. I'd have to say it's just kind of concept. This is some good stuff here, but for the most part, this is just a very beleaguered and kind of swash project. I'd have to say in particular, just the concept behind it. It just has a little bit more, just has some relatively kind of gun shy kind of appeal about it. I mean, even Birdman is not on this project full blown. I'd have to say it's just kind of the concept about it, but it is some good stuff. Beat It is a pretty nice one. This is like a mellow kind of ladies gem. I'd have to say in particular, it's like a residential thump. I'd have to say pretty good concept for that. It's like a trendy trap song for like 2014. I'd have to say in particular, and this is just like some local cruise around type music. So it's a good concept. Do definitely appreciate. Yeah, a lot of these are just pretty ho-hum and like their overall vibes. Not to say in terms of quality, but just the relative kind of lackadaisicalness of a lot of these. It's just some basic, just simple kind of cruise around relative, just standard trap day pitches like that. That's definitely the field. Beat It. And another one that's like that is I Got or I Know It. Another basic day commerce type song would be I Got. Pretty nice one for that. It's like a floaty kind of basic trap commerce of a song I'd have to say for that. And in particular, some good stuff. There's like a bass thump. I would have to say a good concept for some of that type of stuff. It's like a regular late day activity. Definitely for some of that, I'd have to suppose in particular. And it's like some errands finishing up type stuff, I'd have to say. So some good enough concepts, just getting some of that done in particular. Just the relative tasks and just things afoot as far as that particular kind of happens. Just the excellent type concept of just standard day commerce, just maybe like 6:30 p.m. some of those type pitches. But some of these songs, I feel like Beat It, I Got, some of these type ones also go well with like I Know It, which is a pretty good one. This is definitely one more exciting type one. This has a little bit more tempo towards it. It's like a jazzy kind of outing music, I'd have to say in particular. This has an exciting tempo for starting turn up, I'd have to say. Pretty dope concept, get some of that in particular. And this is definitely like a smoke one type song and a smoke one kind of highlight, I'd have to say. So it's good and get some smokage going as far as that particular kind of happens. I do feel like 730 is I do definitely feel like 730 and Throw Your Hood Up are some of the more glitzy kind of night venue type ones I'd have to say, but I do feel like I Know it's definitely like a primer for some of those type songs I'd have to say. But then Pull Up and I'm a Ride are definitely some good car centric type ones to kind of get ready for and get prepared for some of that. So it's just some good concepts. The amalgamation, how some of these work, is just interesting that this is a pretty varietized project. You definitely get a lot of stuff in like the format. It's decent mixtape here to get some of this in particular. This way that a lot of this is thrown together. It's just kind of the concept that I kind of feel like the way that the execution about it kind of happened was just not as tight knit as it probably needed to be, which is kind of the thing. There's more songs on here. I just feel like some of these, like Freestyle, is kind of disappointing. Like to talk about some of these songs I didn't recommend on here, like Milk Marie, Freestyle, Soldier. Some of these type ones were just poor type ones to kind of choose for like mixtape singles and promotional singles as far as that particular kind of went. I definitely think they needed another moment. I think Pull Up probably would have been a better song to have chosen for like a single. Some other ones that probably would have been better would have been 730. That would have been a pretty nice one. Apparently Flava was chosen as a single. Also, this had a pretty relatively weak production, I'd have to say. It was just kind of one. It's another one that was trying to be pop trap and some pitches like that. Just a more whimsical type one that didn't really pull off the vibe quite as well. Gavinci, just it was too long of an intro. I mean, I feel like the minute-long intro from Birdman was a decent concept just because Birdman's pretty fly and stuff, but just the concept of that particular affair, that particular song was just not quite as compelling, I'd have to say. It didn't translate to much as far as like the appeal behind it. And it's the same thing. There were some brooding type songs in here, some definite kind of just moody type ruminating in a more angered sense in songs like War Ready and See You and some of those type ones. But I just feel like the appeal of some of these is just kind of a different pitch, just kind of depends upon the mood, I would have to say. If you're in more kind of like an annoyed type mood, some of these type songs have a little bit more appeal. It's just kind of the concept, but I feel like nonetheless some of the production fare on some of these type ones is just not as enthralling to really have within that setting. You know, when you think of like a song, I mean, some of these just had haphazard appeal, I'd have to say. And there's some other ones on here, like there's some weaker ones towards the end, like Who's on Top was another commercial type one that just didn't pull off the vibe quite as well, I'd have to say. Just some concepts like that, I suppose, and other kind of ones that just were not quite as compelling. So it's just kind of the concept about it. Just the concept that they're just, maybe they're just I do definitely feel like there's some good variety on this particular product. It's just kind of the concept that it just needed like a dynamite production, like a dynamite single. I feel like the approaches behind some of these did have like some degree of compellingness about it, but it's just kind of the concept that just the feistiness and the overall ambition of this particular product was just not that strong. I feel like it definitely kind of felt more beleaguered. This is kind of the concept. It's just kind of the aspect that it's not like, I don't feel like this is like mood. I don't feel like this is like emo type music in the sense where they're just super depressed and pitches like that. It was just kind of the concept. You would think that considering how popular that Young Thug kind of was around this time, that there would have been like a dynamite trap single that could have anchored this product, something like that. It just felt like they saved all those particular hit songs for like an album that didn't come out until like 2018. I want to say Young Thug's debut album didn't come out until 2018, so just needed something to kind of anchor it. I feel like Tell 'Em Lies is a good pop trap type tune that did have some relative kind of commercial appeal. Probably did get to 106 and Park, some of those type pitches. I'm a Ride's a pretty nice one also, but I had to say most of the singles on here are not that appealing, which is kind of relatively odd just within the concept. It's just kind of a haphazard type mixtape, but it's good, but it's just kind of concept. It's just overstuffed, and I just would have to say the variety on here definitely has its appeal. The social score is probably going to get a higher score, but it's just kind of the concept that just between not having like super standout kind of productions and then just kind of the appeal of some of these type ones just being weaker and just not quite as composed and just overall just nailed quite as well. That's just kind of the concept. But so the score I'm going to give this mixtape, me recommending 8 songs out of 20 on here, I'm going to give this mixtape like a 4.75 out of 10. It's a little bit less than average just in particular. I know because it's a mixtape and it's free, I could probably give it a higher score, but it is pretty, it's not subpar full blown. It's just, it has its snags about it, I had to say. But the social score is going to get like a 6.25 out of 10 because it does have some gems on here. I do like these car centric and cruise around type songs. I do like some of these pop trap type moments. There's at least a couple on there that I recommend, like Tell 'Em Lies and possibly like Beat It's a pretty nice one for that. And some of these type ones on here are like I definitely feel like Throw Your Hood Up's one of the best songs on here. I really feel like Nipsey Hussle did a great job on this particular song, pitches like that. There's just some good moments. There is at least one good nightclub song on here in 730, I'd have to say. I do feel like I'm a Ride, like once again, I'm a Ride and Pull Up are some good vehicle kind of thumping pull up type songs to kind of get, and then I know it's just like a good one to get excited as you get ready to turn up a bit. So it's this kind of concept. There's some decent nightlife on here. It does have that relative appeal, but it just kind of feels somewhat just underhanded, I have to say. It's just the main concept about it. Just considering that they knew that they were going to put 20 songs on there, it's just surprising that they didn't have more gems to be able to kind of pack it full blown. It's this kind of concept. But just refer back to some of these complaints, you'll see what I'm talking about. It just has the variety, but it's just kind of the concept. It's just not quite as executed as well. So that's kind of the concept. But in terms of the future, like Rich Gang dried up in 2014. This is their most recent project. Birdman hasn't really put out projects in a while. He did put out a project with NBA Youngboy and pitches like that. Young Thugs, and Birdman put out a project in 2021 with NBA Youngboy. That's his most recent one. Young Thug, that's Birdman's most recent project. Young Thug's in prison and has been in prison since 2022. And Rich Homie Quan kind of dried up later on throughout the late 2010s. I'd have to say in particular. So it's a dope enough concept to get some of of these projects. I definitely have some more Rich Gang projects in particular I'm going to get to as time goes along, and I'd say so it's a dope enough concept to get some of these. I feel like this is a relatively solid enough project to kind of download and pitches like that, considering it's free. You do at least get a good 8-9 songs. Maybe there might be one or two extras that could kind of have some relative appeal. Maybe Milk Marie could kind of be one to almost kind of have. I mean, that's a relatively commercial type one. There might be like a couple other ones that have some relative kind of appeal just within this sense, but for the most part, it's a haphazard project, but it does have the gems on it that are worth some good nightlife and appeal just for like some mixtape type fare, circa like the early trap domination of like 2010s is to like the recent times that it's been dominating. So it's some good concepts of like a primer for some of that type dominant sound.